Good to have you with us here on BBC News Now. Matthew's up next. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The Trump-Putin phone call is expected to happen shortly. The US says many elements for a peace agreement in Ukraine have been agreed. We have correspondents in Washington, Warsaw and Kyiv to take us through the developments as they happen. Programmed the President of Finland. Our other main headlines here. Israel launches dozens of airstrikes on Gaza in the largest series of attacks since the ceasefire began in January. Here in the UK, the government sets out cuts to disability benefits that will hit 1 million people, with the aim of getting people back to work and saving £7 billion. And back to Earth with a splash. After 9 months in space, 2 NASA astronauts finally start their journey from the International Space Station home. Hello and welcome to BBC News. We have 2 major stories that we're going to focus on in the coming hours. The Trump-Putin phone call on Ukraine and the new crisis in Gaza after Israel launched an intensive wave of attack. Huge implications for both stories. So do stay with us over the next few hours. We'll bring you all the main developments. Before we take a break, let me just show you the live pictures from the White House. First of all, we wait for any further developments and readouts in terms of what is actually happening and said in this conversation. Just that one line from the White House so far, that the talks have started and they're going, quote, well. So that is the live shot from Washington. Let me show you the live pictures from Moscow, because we have also heard that there will be some sort of readout in Moscow as well, their version of what has been said. So just as soon as any detail emerges, we will be back there to give you the very latest. Around the world and across the UK, you are watching BBC News. You're watching BBC News. Let's turn to that other big story that we promised to keep you right up to date with, because the events in Gaza dominating headlines today. More than 400 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes in Gaza, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. The Israeli military said it was carrying out extensive strikes after talks to extend the ceasefire failed. That is, of course, your central message. Adam, we have to leave there because we're coming to the end of this particular half hour of our programme. Thank you so much for taking time to speak to us. More on that story, more on the Trump-Putin call. Do stay with us here on BBC News. Welcome back to BBC News. Let's turn to our main headlines here. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have started a much anticipated phone call to discuss a possible ceasefire in Ukraine. Israel launches dozens of airstrikes on Gaza in the largest wave of attacks since the start of the ceasefire in January. Here in the UK, the government sets out cuts to disability benefits that will hit 1 million people, with the aim of getting people back to work and saving £7 billion. And back to Earth with a splash. After 9 months in space, 2 NASA astronauts finally start their journey home from the International Space Station. One more on all of those stories coming up. First, though, let's catch up with sports headlines. Dilith is here, and good afternoon.
Hi there, Matthew. Good afternoon to you. Let's start with tennis, because the Players' Union, co-founded by Novak Djokovic, has begun legal action against tennis's governing bodies, citing anti-competitive practices and a blatant disregard for player welfare. And that's all your sport for now. Back to you, Matthew.
Dana, thanks very much. We'll have more here in a moment or two about the welfare changes, but there you can see on the screen the story. We're keeping an eye on that Trump-Putin call. We're being told by the White House that call is still in progress. We earlier heard from the White House saying it was going well. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. You're watching BBC News. Now, a team of research scientists working in the Antarctic have reportedly made a desperate appeal for help after they say a colleague threatened to kill one of them. Splashdown. Let me tell you here in the next few minutes, we're keeping an eye on that Putin-Trump call. No word. We know that that phone call is still going on. We are live at both in Moscow and at the White House. We're also keeping an eye at the UN because they are discussing the situation in Gaza with the renewed operations from Israel. Those are the live pictures. So we'll have the latest on all of that coming up here on the programme in a moment or two. Don't go away. Live from London, this is BBC News. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin hold a much-anticipated phone call to discuss a possible ceasefire in Ukraine. This was Finland's president talking to this programme.
We need this peace in 2 phases. The first phase is a ceasefire, which is completely unconditional. And only after that do we start the peace negotiations. And I think President Trump's aim is to basically stop the killing. And a good day to do that is today, if Putin is willing.
Israel launches dozens of airstrikes on Gaza in the largest series of attacks since the ceasefire began in January. Here in the UK, the government sets out cuts to disability benefits that will hit 1 million people with the aim of getting people back to work and saving £7 billion. And back to Earth with a splash. After 9 months in space, 2 NASA astronauts finally start their journey home from the International Space Station. Hello and welcome to BBC News. The stakes could hardly be higher. President Trump and President Putin have begun their potentially crucial phone call to discuss a temporary ceasefire in Russia's war on Ukraine. It's the culmination of weeks of intense shuttle diplomacy. The US president has already persuaded Ukraine's President Zelensky to agree, in principle, to a 30-day pause in the fighting. Next up on the programme, we'll get the latest on what is happening in Gaza. We were there at the UN Security Council. We'll get more analysis of all the events of the last 24 hours. Around the world and across the UK, you are watching BBC News. You're watching BBC News. Now, as promised, let's turn to the situation in Gaza. More than 400 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes on Gaza, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. The Israeli military said it was carrying out extensive strikes after talks to extend the ceasefire failed at the Security Council. I'm back with much more on all of these main stories. We also have the business news coming up here on BBC News.
prepares to release its debt brake. Its outgoing parliament has approved a massive increase in government borrowing, unlocking hundreds of billions of dollars for defence and infrastructure. The price of gold hits a record high as geopolitical instability spills over into global markets. And winning big. A study on the revenue earned from women's elite sport says it's surging beyond expectations. Hello there, welcome to Business Today. I'm Tadhg Enright. Well, we are starting in Germany, where the outgoing parliament has approved a plan to break with generations of tradition and amend the constitution to allow for borrowing of up to €1 trillion to spend on defence and infrastructure. And that is your Business Today. I'm Tadhg Enright. Do stay with us here on BBC News.
Welcome back to BBC News. As we've been telling you, we are keeping an eye on that phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Let me tell you, just in the last couple of minutes, it's been reported out of the Kremlin that that call between the two presidents has now completed. That's being reported on Russian state media. So the call has finished, clearly. That is the quote that has just been posted. Stay with us on BBC News for much more on our main story. Well, just do head, whilst you see that QR code on your screen, do head to the BBC website. The live page is up and running. It has the very latest lines. As I say, that line I read out coming from the Kremlin, but the latest lines too coming from the White House. So the latest reaction, the background, the context, do head to the BBC live page and you can keep right up to date. We'll be back on that story here in a moment or two, but a couple of court cases to squeeze in before that, because here in the UK we've had a trial of 3 men accused in connection with the theft of a gold toilet from Blenheim Palace. The fully functioning solid gold toilet, worth £4.8 million, was a work of art called America. It was stolen from the stately home in Oxfordshire in September 2019. Martine, thanks very much for taking us through all of that. We're going to take a short break. When we're back, we'll have all the latest on that Putin-Trump call. It has finished. We'll talk to our correspondents across the globe in various capitals, but we will pause. We'll catch up with weather details first, and that's with Thomas. Live from London, this is BBC News. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have finished their phone call discussing a possible ceasefire in Ukraine. Well, this was Finland's president talking to this programme.
We need this peace in 2 phases. The first phase is a ceasefire, which is completely unconditional. And only after that do we start the peace negotiations. And I think President Trump's aim is to basically stop the killing. And a good day to do that is today, if Putin is willing.
We have correspondents in Washington, Warsaw and Kyiv to take us through the developments as they happen. Israel launches dozens of airstrikes on Gaza in the largest series of attacks since the ceasefire began in January. Here in the UK, the government sets out changes to disability benefits that will impact 1 million people. They say the aim is to get people back to work and save £5 billion a year by the end of the decade. And back to Earth with a splash. After their extended 9-month stay in space, 2 NASA astronauts finally start their journey home from the International Space Station. Hello and welcome to BBC News, and let's start with that breaking news of the last few minutes that the much anticipated call between President Trump and President Putin has concluded. That's according to a Kremlin statement in the last few minutes. The call was the culmination of weeks of intense diplomacy and centred on efforts to secure a ceasefire in Russia's war on Ukraine. Before we take a short break, let me repeat that breaking news of the last few minutes that Israel says air raid sirens have sounded after more rocket launches from Yemen. That, of course, happening after the events overnight, with 400 people being killed by Israeli airstrikes on Gaza. That, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. We'll have much more on those elements, what is happening in Gaza, here on the programme in a moment or two. Around the world and across the UK, you are watching BBC News. Now, as promised, let's turn to the situation in Gaza, because more than 400 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. The Israeli military said it was carrying out extensive strikes after talks to extend the ceasefire failed. It's the biggest wave since the ceasefire with Hamas began in January. Our Middle East correspondent Yolande Nell sent this report. Before we close, the first breaking lines coming from that phone call coming from the Kremlin, with Putin reaffirming commitment to a peaceful resolution of the conflict. No details as to how, whether he's signing up to the ceasefire or any conditions. They talk about a prisoner swap of 175 prisoners of war. And then the Kremlin says Putin and Trump have agreed to stay in contact. So quite broad brush. Those are the first lines. More will be coming in the next few minutes. So do stay with us here on BBC News. We'll keep you right up to date with that story and all the other main stories here on the programme. Welcome back to BBC News. Let's turn to our main headlines here. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have finished their phone call discussing a possible ceasefire in Ukraine. Israel launches dozens of airstrikes on Gaza in the largest wave of attacks since the start of that ceasefire in January. Here in the UK, the government has set out changes to disability benefits that will impact 1 million people. We'll have more reaction to that breaking development. A gang is convicted over the theft of a £4.8 million gold toilet from an art exhibition at Blenheim Palace. Before we go to sport, let's return to that breaking news. That phone call has ended between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Let me take you through the lines that are emerging. They are coming from the Kremlin at the moment, but I took you through some of them, saying that Putin had reaffirmed his commitment to a peaceful resolution of the conflict. That is very broad brush. We were waiting to hear more of the crucial detail. I'll come back to that in a moment. But also the Kremlin making the point Ukraine and Russia would agree to swap 175 prisoners of war, and Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin agreed to stay in contact. Now, in terms of the context of any potential ceasefire initiative, the Kremlin saying in that context, Vladimir Putin has said there must be a stop to Ukrainian mobilization and the arming of Ukraine. And that is very, very clearly a condition, exactly the sort of thing that EU officials are warning against. Alexander Stubb, who is the president of Finland, he was on the programme a couple of hours ago. I asked him directly about that point, because it had been floated that that may be one of the conditions that the Russian president would set, and he has done exactly that according to the Kremlin. I'll repeat it because it is very important here. In terms of the context of the ceasefire initiative, they say, Moscow, that Vladimir Putin has said there must be a stop to Ukrainian mobilization. So that's what Ukraine does. And the arming of Ukraine, that of course is what European countries and NATO have been doing. So two critical conditions there, both I would say are unacceptable at first reading to the various Europeans, given what they've said over recent weeks. So those are some of the lines coming into us here from that meeting. One other line, actually, I forgot to mention, with the Kremlin saying that Vladimir Putin has agreed to halt strikes on the energy infrastructure for 30 days, assuming, of course, there was some sort of ceasefire. So those are the key lines that are coming out. We'll return to those breaking developments here in a moment or two. So do stay with us with that. And of course, head to the BBC Live page, and all those new lines are coming in all the time. So we'll return to that in a moment or two. Let us pause, though, from Gaza, catch up with the sport of the day. Gavin is waiting with the headlines. Gavin, over to you.
Yes, thanks very much indeed, Matthew. The Players' Union has begun legal action against tennis's governing bodies, citing anti-competitive practices and a blatant disregard for player welfare. And there we go. That's all the sport from us for now, Matthew. We'll have more a bit later on. We'll see you then.
Kevin, thanks very much. Let's return straight away to our main story, those breaking lines that I was just taking you through, with the Kremlin saying that although Vladimir Putin supports the idea of a ceasefire, I'm just going to read that line because it is the absolutely critical line. In context of a ceasefire initiative, Vladimir Putin has said there must be a stop to Ukrainian mobilization and the arming of Ukraine. Let's go straight to the White House. Tom Bateman is there for us. And Tom, I was talking to the President of Finland on this programme, asked him exactly that question, and he answered really clearly that would be unacceptable as a condition being laid out by the Russian president, and that appears to be exactly what he's done. Frank Gardner there in Germany. We leave it there, but thanks very much. Let me just recap where we are as we come to the end of today's Verified Live, because throughout the course of the day, and actually for a number of days, we've been building up, haven't we, to this moment, this phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. All the pressure had been on President Zelensky to sign up to this idea of a 30-day ceasefire. He agreed, so all the attention on this call. And the result, the early lines coming from it, and the crucial line, and I'll repeat it from the Kremlin. In context of the ceasefire, Vladimir Putin says there must be a stop to Ukrainian mobilization and the arming of Ukraine, and we know that that will be unacceptable to Ukraine, unacceptable to the Europeans. So we wait to get more reaction. So do stay with us here on BBC News. We'll get more from Kyiv in the next hour and more from the White House and our correspondents there. Thanks for watching the programme today, and hopefully I'll see you at the same time tomorrow. Bye for now.
Hello. It's been a sunny day across the UK, hardly a cloud in the sky.